we're at with the timings as well. I would very much like to say how lovely it is to see a practice bringing everybody together. I work with loads of practices all over the UK, and this isn't a common occurrence, so it shows a real investment in you as a team by your leadership team. I know sometimes that can feel really weird, but it's a really good thing to do, and hopefully it's nice for you to see people from other branches that you don't necessarily interact with all the time as well, which is why we've moved you around a bit today, because sometimes it's useful to hear that different voice. See other people's perspectives and hear other people's ideas as well, because we all do things slightly differently. So today we're going to look at how we communicate with our clients. This will reflect on how we communicate with each other as well. It's going to cover the experience that we give to our clients, the service that we offer. It's going to look at some bits to do with finance and empathy. So we're going to cover quite a few areas. There's no role play. I'll put your mind at rest now. It's always a worry when we do this. But I will be asking you to communicate with each other. So who's been to a workshop with me before? There are a couple of faces that are familiar, but Ben has. So if you have, or if you've been to Client Matters, has anybody been to that? Okay, so this all might be new stuff to you, which is good. I was going to say, if you've been to one before, it'll be like a test to see what you remember from last time. So I'm Jo, I'm one of the business support team. There are 7 of us in our team, and we cover all of the UK. And we all support with training and development, different aspects of the practice. Everything we do is kind of unique to the practice and the needs. From what I go through today and what Ben started with this morning, it's almost like we planned it. It flows quite nicely together, so that's really good. But I'm an RVN, and I was in practice until 2021, so I can completely empathise with the challenges that we have in practice. I was a practice manager, so dealing with clients from that perspective as well. So I can hopefully draw on those experiences and share that with you. It's a relatively recent experience, and I've been there and dealt with that as well. So I empathise all the way through. Really important in these sessions, because what we want to create is a safe space where everybody feels they can share, they can talk, and in your groups you can share ideas in a nice, safe environment that's free from judgment. I know we have banter in our teams, but think about, is that really warranted in this, or are actually we having a really good discussion about it? So just think about the way you're communicating with each other. Join in, be engaged, because what you put into it is what you will take away from it as well. I'm not going to be picking on people individually, there's none of that, but I really welcome your voice. Be open-minded. Just because you've done one thing one way doesn't mean that's the only way or the best way. Or you could be doing something in a way that's really good. Share it. Have that conversation. Be supportive of one another and try and avoid distraction. If you do need to take a call, that's fine, but just make sure you step out of the room so that it doesn't disturb other people working in this environment too. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. So, we're going to look at communication, we're going to look at empathy, and we're going to do some scenarios, which you've probably seen in the workbook already. None of those are things that are made up and plucked out of thin air. They're all things that have happened, and they probably happen to you on a frequent occurrence as well. We're going to work through that together and see what we could do differently. So this is an idea generating session which builds on what Ben was saying to you earlier on today. Think about ways of doing things. So how do we communicate? Pretty well? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Quite efficient at that process, aren't we? We take it for granted. It's only when we come up against a challenge, if we've got hearing difficulties, got language barriers, that we realise how much we do take communication for granted. It's a process that's quite in-depth, and there are lots of areas within that for miscommunication to happen. And the way we're going into communication, I want you to think about perspective, because the whole idea of this journey is to think about somebody else's perspective. So here we've got an image there. Is anybody right? Is anybody wrong? We're lacking some information, aren't we? But what this is telling you is for that individual, that's their reality. That's what they're seeing. So just because you see something different, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. And I think that's the key part of remembering how we communicate. We need to think about that. We need to reflect on that. Just because we see it one way doesn't mean everybody else sees it that way as well. So I'm going to show you the transactional model of communication, and there are loads of different models of communication, and there's one that's just, backwards and forwards, which is me just saying something and walking away. But actually, this is the process when it's broken down, and you can see the areas where we can miscommunicate. So So let's think of, I'm the sender right now. I've got information, thoughts, feelings, a concept that I want to share with you as a group. So I'm doing that. And I'm doing that by formulating my ideas into words. So I have to make sure that the words I'm using reflect what I want to say to you. And we get that wrong sometimes. You can think of many times where that's gone wrong. We're formulating it into words for sending. And then I have to transmit it. So right here I'm doing that face to face, verbally, but it can be email, text. We use WhatsApp, we use voice notes, and loads of different ways of communicating with people. So I've done that, that's me transmitting to you. So think of it as I've thrown a ball of plasticine, and I've thrown it to Nikki. Nikki then catches it, and she has to understand what I've said, she has to decode what I've said. Those words have to mean something to her and be relatable, so that then she can reconstruct that into something that makes sense to her. So this will then be reformulated based on your understanding and your knowledge. If you're with somebody you're very much on the same page, talking about a very specific thing, we do that really quickly and easily. But think about it if you're learning something new, or talking about something that you really don't understand. It's quite hard to do, isn't it? And that's how we communicate with our clients. We often take it for granted that they should know that. We know it, we deal with it every day. They don't. So are we checking their knowledge level? So if I did that, and I'd just thrown that ball of clay, Nikki had caught it, and then I walked off, that'd be it, that'd be me done. But how do I know that what I've said has been understood correctly? And that's where I need to ask for feedback. And that's when our conversational becomes transactional, because it goes backwards and forwards. So I'm asking Nikki to throw that ball of clay back to me, and I'm checking that it's still in the shape that I sent it to her, but actually she's made it into a slightly different shape. So then we need to go backwards and forwards a bit more until we fully understand. We're inviting feedback, we're having open questions to encourage people to ask us questions. Because while we're doing all of that, and it's quite a complex process, would you agree? That we don't think about? There's a lot of noise going on. Now that could be actual noise. We're in a busy practice, aren't we? There's a lot going on. There's people having conversations, there's dogs barking, there's somebody asking you questions, there's phones ringing. There's a lot going on. But then there's other types of noise as well. Who listens well when they're hungry? I don't. Who listens well if you've had a really stressful journey to work, or something horrible's gone wrong at home, your house is flooded and you've had to come into work? All you're going to be thinking about is those things, so actually you're not really listening at all. So not only have you got this pathway going on, I've remembered to ask for feedback, but I've also got all this background noise going on as well. Think of that from our client's perspective. They're worried, they're anxious, they don't really understand or know whether they can ask something. They could be worried about what they're going to say to me about price, what if they don't tell me, what am I going to do? There's so many worries going on there that's background noise within that conversation we're having. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. So not only do we have that, but the words we use only form 7% of how we communicate. It's a really small amount. So you can really see, can't you, when you're not communicating face to face, where miscommunication can happen. Who's had that email come across? You know, what's wrong with them today? Why are they shouting at me? They're not, necessarily. But we will make that assumption from the way something's written, the use of capital letters, the fact that it could just be a sentence and not how are you doing this week or anything else like that. Are we thinking about that in the way we communicate? Or are we giving loads of information and a lot of it will be discarded? So 38% is our tone, and we know that. You know if someone's being sarcastic, don't you? If you know if somebody's not being congruent with what they say, with how they say it. How many times have you had a conversation that's ended in, well, that wasn't very nice, or that didn't work, did it? Well, that's not what I said. No, it's how you said it. We recognise that, we do that, we look and listen for that all the time. And then body language is a huge part. You can tell if somebody is not engaged, you can tell if somebody doesn't understand, you can tell if somebody is not listening or being defensive. We read that when we have a communication, and we mirror what other people do. So we can change that by, in our communications, being very open, non-confrontational and calm. if we're in a difficult situation, for example, because then the other person finds it very difficult to carry on being that way that they're being. Does that make sense? And then I've got the listening staircase. And when I first came across the listening staircase, it was an eye-opening moment for me, because I could see myself on these two steps nearly all the time. It's how we function, it's how we communicate. The first step there is ignoring. You're in the same space, but you're not really listening. It could be a conversation that's not really anything to do with you. You might hear bits of it, but you're not really paying attention. Or somebody's talking at you and you're choosing to ignore and carry on with what you're doing. The second step there is pretend listening and waiting to speak. We do that a lot. And a really good example of that was shared was somebody was talking to another person about their holiday they'd just been on. That other person had been there on holiday a couple of years ago and really wanted to share that piece of information. But by holding that in your mind, ready to share that information, because it's what we want to do, we want to share, we want to relate, are they actually listening to what that person's saying? It's why if you're on reception, who has a notebook or pad with things that would make no sense at all if you looked at it like the next day. Because you have to empty your mind, don't you? You have to take notes and try, because you need to reflect back to it, but if you're holding that in your mind, you're not going to listen properly. If we're in a conflict situation about price, for example, or we think it's about price, somebody says to us, well, I've paid this and I've not got my results yet and I've been waiting and I'm really worried we're going to fix on price, and become quite defensive about that and want to answer that. That's on the second step, the third step there. By doing that, we're missing actually, it's not the price necessarily, it's that they're really worried and they want a resolution. So think, my challenge to you from today, when you're at home, because you'll notice you do it more at home, I sit on that third step with my husband frequently, ready to defend myself, particularly around the dishwasher. Think about where you're doing that, if you're doing that. When you've had a conversation, reflect on that conversation. Did I actually really listen to what they were saying? Where was I sat on those first three steps? Because where we want to be is that attentive listening. So we're actually listening to understand what that person's saying to us. If we have something that we really want to say, if it's important, jot it down. Most of the time it's not, let it go, because if it's relevant, it will come back. It's a really hard thing to do, but you can train yourself to do it. And it makes you a much better listener. Can anybody relate to any of those steps? Yeah. We all do it. It's what we do. And then let's have a think about open questions. Now, I was going to do a game, but there's quite a few of you, so it might take a while and it gets very, very noisy. But open questions, what are they? Shout out to me what they start with. W. W is a, yeah, definitely in there. What word? Tell me about. Okay. Yeah. Sorry?
What kind of?
What? Yeah. So we've got a who, what, where, why, which, how for your general starters, for your open questions. What do you think open questions do? What do they generate?
Response. Information.
Yeah. A lot of information or a little bit of information?
Quite a lot.
Depending on the question, certainly can. If you ask a closed question, and I think particularly for the clinical team, that's something that we do in clinical background, we use closed questions a lot because we're clarifying things, we're clarifying instruction, particularly if it's in an emergency situation. We need that yes, no, or that repetitive response. We're not going to ask, how do you feel like this might work while the dog's in cardiac arrest, for example? We're not going to do that. So actually it comes more naturally to us to work on closed questions. Who thinks closed questions are quicker? Yeah? No. How you use your questions is really important. Now, I'm not saying never ask a closed question again, because you will be there for days. But what you want to do is you want to start open and funnel down. Because if you start narrow with a closed question on a subject that is quite big, or they're trying to explain different things, you might find you've got through an entire consult looking at a particular lump that they wanted looking at. 15 minutes is gone, 20 minutes is gone, whatever your appointment time is, and then whip out this other list. That happens frequently. Whereas if you started with so what would you like me to look at for you today? You're going to get the list first and then you can work down. So that's an obvious example, but there are lots of areas we can do this. We really should start, when we're exploring something, trying to use our open questions and then narrow it down to the yes and no. Because often as well, if you ask a yes or no question, we can lead, can't we? And they might nod and smile and agree with us in the consult and then go out to the reception desk and say something completely different, which happens as well. So I want you to think about the questions. So our closed questions we use to confirm facts, to clear up confusion, or to narrow the focus. Very specific use. Our open questions, we've got objective questions to get facts. We've got subjective questions to get feelings and perspectives. And then we've got speculative questions to be thought-provoking and good for creative potential. Ben asked loads of open questions to you earlier today because he was trying to generate that creativity and open that thought process. He could have just gone through it and said, do you agree, do you not agree? Yes or no? But he wouldn't have got anything back from you that's your thinking process. Does that make sense? So when we're having conversations and we're trying to get to the heart of potentially a problem, a challenge that we're facing, or find out a little bit more about something, and I think our nurses probably do this if you do care plans on admission, when you're asking more questions about what they do, we use open questions there because we're trying to get information in. So I think we're not always paying attention to whether we're using open or closed, and that really does impact that communication model that we looked at as well. Think about whether relevant, think about the questions you're asking could be changed. So the game that we do there is the yes-no game, where you sit with a partner and you have to guess the famous person that they're thinking about. And if you do yes and no questions, unless you know that person very well, you won't, so unlikely to get it in 5 questions. Whereas if you do an open question, you're much more likely to get it because you're going to be able to start broad and then funnel down. Does that make sense? Any questions? Please do shout out if you've got anything that you disagree with, that you want to share, because it's a safe space. So we went through that because what I want you to do before we go into the next bit, which is about our clients, is understand how we communicate and the specifics of communication. Because communication helps us gain clarity in the tasks within our teams and what is expected of us by our clients. It helps us understand perspective, so it helps us see around the other side of that number that we've got there, so we can actually see their frame of reference. It helps us feel like we're able to communicate our needs. In some situations, particularly if it's a more challenging situation, I just feel like I don't know answer, I don't really know what to say. But open questions, we use them a lot in coaching, and it can really help people, think about what they're feeling and where they need to go with that. It really helps with that empathy. It helps with problem solving because you understand what they might need or want in that situation, whether you can help that. And it helps avoid misunderstanding because you've not gone down that leading question route and come out with a completely different end to what that other person saw. Does that make sense? Right. So that's why it's useful to do this sometimes, is just to take that step back and think, how would I feel in that situation? How would I respond to that situation? What could we do differently? What went wrong there? Because actually, so this survey was done in 2017, but I've got another one that's much more recent, and actually this has not changed, which is why I've not put the updated version in. And hopefully, being customers yourselves in many other situations, you would agree with this. We want warm and friendly responses. You want to feel like they're acknowledging you. If they remember your name, if you're a repeat visitor, then that's even better, isn't it? Because that makes you feel important and valued. And by important, I don't mean red carpet rolled out every time they walk in, but we see many people on a day. Is that person being treated as one of many? Because for that person, it could be the first time in the year they've been seeing, and they might not see you again for another year or 6 months. So actually, that's quite a big thing to them. They want to be listened to. Are we hearing or are we assuming? Bundling everybody into this assumption. They want someone to know their name, or in our case, pets is a really good thing. If you get the sex wrong, you know about it, don't you? They let you know very quickly. And flexibility. We know that we can't do everything, and we can't always meet their direct requests, but we can demonstrate some flexibility within that as well, within the constraints that we have. And they want recovery, sort the problem out if there is an issue. What options have we got available? So when we're looking at our conflict and our complaints, because we all get them, who in here deals with complaints?
Oh, apparently I do.
I think all receptionists do as well.
Yes.
Regularly. Yeah,
I agree. You tend to get it first, don't you, before it goes anywhere else. Now the BDS do all of these published results of complaints and the stats around it, and 80% of complaints received by an organisation are likely to have poor communication as their root cause, either with the customer or within the organisation itself. You agree? So even when that complaint comes back down to a cost, it's likely that that hasn't been communicated properly, expectations haven't been met, or they didn't know what to expect. You're on different paths. So the cartoon example there is, we should have results by tomorrow, and then they're phoning at 12 or 1 a.m. the next day, they've not had the results back yet. Now this happens quite a lot. I hear people having a conversation, the results will be back in a few days, and we're a bit more blasé about it. But that person could be really worried. And if they haven't heard back in a few days, which to them is definitely 3 days on the dot, you're going to get a complaint. Well, I paid for this, you said I'd get this, and that hasn't occurred. Because they're worried. Always give yourself a little bit more in there as well. If you know something's going to take a week to come back, say 10 days, and when it comes back in 3 days, expectations are massively exceeded and they're happy. So give yourself room, give yourself time to deal with things. So that's that example of that complaint there. But when we're dealing with difficult conversations, everything that we've been talking about up to now with our communication is demonstrating empathy. So what is empathy? And what is compassion? And there are three levels of empathy. We've got our cognitive, which is just understanding, which is what we really need to be doing. Then we move on to an emotional connection, which you probably find you do when it comes to euthanasias, particularly with a client that you know quite well, or a pet that you're invested in. And then we've got our empathetic compassion, which is the act. And this is where, when we talk about compassion fatigue, this is where it can occur. And you can become a little bit numb to it. Because there is only so much we can do. And at the end of your booklet, I haven't got a slide on it, but what I want you to do is when you're feeling overwhelmed or you're facing these barriers, you need to think about what you can control. And that's generally your own actions and behaviours. But we can take time to understand their perspective. Empathy is the ability to recognise, understand and share the thoughts and feelings of others. It's quite in-depth empathy. Very difficult to do that all the time, but we can certainly take our time to try and understand them. But what we can do is put ourselves in our customer's shoes because it helps us see their viewpoint. So, I can see this has caused you to feel upset. Recognise and name their emotions. Who names their emotions when they feel them? Does anybody say, I just feel really annoyed right now? And actually it diminishes it because you've given it a name and you've taken back control from how that emotion makes you feel. And it's the same in conflict that we have as well. I can see why this has caused you difficulties. I can see where you're coming from and can understand how we've got to this point from what they've told you. None of those are saying you've done something wrong or admitting fault. And you say, I'm really sorry that it's caused you to feel this way. Let's try and see what we can do to get to a resolution. Again, you're not saying you've done something wrong, but you are recognising that something has occurred. And you need to be sincere, because when we talk about tone and body language, you can see when somebody's not being sincere. So when we're diffusing those emotional situations, you can use this formula, which is welcoming the question, the challenge, or the opinion. How many of you, when you've had somebody come to you quite angry or annoyed, have listened and said, thank you for taking the time to share that with me today? Anyone?
Just like my number one friend.
And does it work then?
Yeah.
Because actually, when you think about your experiences of customer service, how much effort does it take to go and give that direct feedback, whether it be positive or negative? It's quite a lot. I hate phoning people, so I wouldn't do that there. And I think if I'm really annoyed in a situation, well, I might send an email, but never do. So actually the fact that someone has brought something to your attention, again, like Ben said, share challenges that you're finding in the practice, because then you know you can act upon them. So thank them for sharing their thoughts. You know, you might feel that actually, if I'd have had that experience that you feel you've had, I'll probably feel the same way. That's okay. And demonstrate value. If we can look into this, would that be a value? You know, you don't assume what they want from that, what their resolution is. Invite them into that conversation, because actually they could have a very different outcome to what you're expecting. Does that make sense? Seen similar ones before? Any similarities to any that you've actually been through is coincidental, right? I should just add. But they're all different things that we see and that we go through, and when you read them on a piece of paper, which is often how you get the complaint in, you can start to see where the communication breakdown happens. So if we start with scenario 1, which is Ernie, would anybody like to go through their discussions and thought processes on that one? Start us on. Or I will pick on a table, not a person.
Just seem like they're massively undersold the service.
Yeah.
Like quick 2-minute job, working long, like you're just undervaluing everything that is sampling, diagnostics, treatment plan.
Yeah.
And like putting the pill and take a minute and
They've tried to put the client at ease with those phrases that they feel are appeasing, but have, yes, exactly, they're massively undervalued what is actually being delivered. What else?
they didn't tell me what was going to cost either.
Yeah. There was no transparency with costs given there, was it? How do you think the client felt? What was her perspective? So she says, for example, she was only in there for 5 minutes and it cost £200. Do you think that's an accurate representation?
Or potentially embarrassed.
Yeah, absolutely.
The dog might have been taken off around the back, so she might have only had 5 minutes with the vet, and then received the rest of the time it was like waiting for the vets rather than the vet working on the dog.
Exactly. So it could have taken 15-20 minutes of your time, but very little of hers, because the rest is being done outside.
And they've obviously not discussed options, because they should have said, you know, we can sample, it'll cost this much.
They made an assumption, didn't they?
Yeah.
So there is the assumption there that this is what route they're going to want to go down. You can have a big clinical debate about how you approach lumps, but this normally wouldn't be your first line of action there without the conversation. But the key things in this really are the language used that you highlighted there. Everything is diminishing the service that's being provided. If you can't, for example, take a sample while you're in the consult room with the client, explain what you're doing, where you're going, that actually there's going to be another qualified member of the team assisting with that. Do you show them the sample afterwards? There are lots of things that you can do and explain so that they understand. And her big thing is that she's not also going to get the results instantly. She doesn't know what that's going to be, and there's a lot of worry there. And that's all a bit of a shock. Actually, if everything had been discussed with her and she'd felt like she'd got a bit of control over the situation, understood the costs behind the situation, you'd have had a very different outcome. The reception team shouldn't have been the first people to tell her how much that consultation was going to be in total. That shouldn't have been a shock when she went out on the desk. And again, there's a lack of specificity, being precise. So, you know, it says we'll call them in a few days when the results are back. We talked about that earlier, didn't we? She would definitely be on the phone in 3 days if there were no results there, fuming probably, and it would have escalated the situation that you've had here. And then that would have been a very big letter to them through the door. So there are loads of different areas there. And like I said, when we're looking at this on paper, it's quite easy to work through. But things like this happen all the time in different situations. So when you're going through that process, and we'll look at the process next, you need to make sure that you are not devaluing your service and what's been there. Explain everything. You might be able to do a clinical exam in a couple of minutes while you're talking to somebody. So then they'll be like, well, they didn't check that. They didn't look at that. You know you did, but they didn't see it. So make sure that we're not taking for granted what they see and what they know, that we're using that explanation. Before she comes in for the appointment, she should have been told that there is a consult fee. So we're setting an expectation that the service is charged for and what's included within that. You're going to have 15 minutes with one of our veterinary surgeons. If you can name the veterinary surgeon that they're going to be in with, or the nurse that they're going to be in with, even better. This person hasn't got a clue necessarily who they're dealing with. Did you introduce yourself and say what your role was, whether that be reception team, whether that be nursing team, whether that be BCA team, or our vets? People don't know. And actually all of this goes towards adding value to that situation. Does anybody else have anything they want to add about Ernie that they saw? Did you see something different?
I felt like the whole thing was made a bit blasé by the vet saying reporting all as well, because then they went on to do quite a potentially serious test for.
Yeah, so her concern could feel a bit diminished in that, couldn't it? She could feel maybe actually she's not being listened to.
Or even more ripped off if all was well, but then they're going and doing £200 tests.
Very good observation. So again, it all goes back down to the language. Yeah.
And even if it was to explain what is an FNA,
Yeah.
what is the test and what you're doing it, why you're doing it,
Yeah.
what you're expecting, are you treating this, are you
Yeah.
gonna find out? It's
And
just
you want to do
fancy.
that with your options, wouldn't you? You'd be like, look, this is what we're doing and this is why. Absolutely. Are we assuming they know what that is? Anything else for scenario 1? Okay, let's have a look at scenario 2 with Sir Gerald, who is now not a necklace. We did have this with a rabbit. It wasn't to be a necklace, but she wanted us to skin it so she could be stroking the fur. Did not happen, I would just add. We did not do that. Okay. So what did you highlight in there? We've all got ashes on the shelves, haven't we? Some for years that sit there collecting dust. So where do you think the communication broke down and what we could have done differently? Does anybody want to take on this one? We were having some good discussions there on Ben's table, so I am going to pick on you.
Sorry.
So Gerald.
Who took the notes? Anybody take notes?
We got them to sign a consent form, but did that have an estimate on it?
Yeah.
Because it suggests that they didn't know the bill. And then when we called them to inform them to collect, that was an opportunity to take payment. Or we had the opportunity to take payment at the time, but we understood that's difficult and we don't often do that.
Why?
It's sad.
It's a challenging conversation.
Yeah.
You can't get into the emotional needs.
We're assuming the emotional needs and taking them on ourselves, aren't we? Euthanasia is it always comes up because it's one of the harder things that we have to do, even though we know in a lot of situations it's the right thing to do and it's what we'd advocate for that pet at that time. But we have to deal with the people, we don't quite know how they're going to react, and everybody's slightly different. So we project our own emotions on there and make assumptions and make decisions for people in a lot of those situations. And we don't need to do that. So Jared, they did sign a consent form. If they weren't aware of the cost of the treatment, is it informed consent?
Not fully.
No. So it could be that you said it verbally. Is that documented anywhere? Because actually you didn't get the chance to take payment when you called them for the ashes because they never answered. You never got to that next step. So this is just sort of something to look at in your process, and why are we doing it that way? Is it because it makes it easier for us to have that conversation? And what I said to you over there is that this is something we very much challenged in our practice because it was a really frequent occurrence and it was getting ridiculous. So you run out of shelf space, you've just got these pets that you paid for, and right, something's got to change. So we did change it, and we changed it that like our new clients got a welcome pack, those that were calling to discuss euthanasia, and you made some good points about not always knowing. There's not all of them, but the ones that you know you can. Send them information after they've made that call so they can have a look at caskets, options, costs, what the process is when they come in, so it's not scary for them. Can we send them a bereavement booklet? Some people need to reach out and need to talk after they've lost their pet because it's a really big trauma for them. Can we send that first and then call them back in a couple of hours? Discuss what they want. It makes life easier for your team and you know where you're going with it. And also you can take payment before they come in. If it's a situation where you don't know at the time, you make the decision at the time, you can still give them that information, give them somewhere to digest and think about it, and then do it. You take payment in the room before it happens, because actually we didn't have a single complaint about that, and we had it implemented for 18 months before I moved. And actually what it stopped is that happening. There's very rare occasion, usually if it was something that was kind of dead on arrival and you didn't get that option. But people were happier because it removed it afterwards. We felt it's very emotional to start with, it's even more emotional afterwards. Who here's had a pet put to sleep? Afterwards, it's really bloody hard, isn't it? And you can't think straight, you can't consent properly. And also your mind changes. I had my horse put to sleep, and the cremation charge for individual cremation was £800. And we went down that route because I was very traumatised and upset, and my husband did it to pacify. After the event, I was like, that was the most stupid thing you've ever decided. Now we've got a hamper-sized basket of house, and it costs £800. What do I do with it? So your mind changes when you're not in that direct emotional situation. So actually, are we giving people time to process that? Then just think about the ways that you can deal with it, what you can do, and you will get some. Has anybody had necklace or firework requests? Yeah. Oh really? Yeah, there are a few, aren't there, that you just like. So we do have to deal with those challenging conversations, and it's never easy. But often you might have somebody within your practice, like you have somebody that wants to take on a wellbeing champion role, that wants to take on that end of life role, to support people, to create things to help people, and then somebody that you can go to, because it's okay if you find that difficult. But there will be other members of the team that can work you through that as well. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to add on to Gerald that they thought about?
Probably another means of contact.
Yes.
Well, we can obviously presume that's just one phone number that's now out of service, no email.
Yeah.
Yeah, another number.
Yeah. How often do we check client details when they make an appointment?
We get a pop-up every year on every client that we click ignore quickly.
As far as I know,
Yeah. We don't do it enough, and it makes a really big difference. So those of us that are dealing with debt, if you don't have a name or even an initial, you can't do anything with that. So actually looking further down the line, have we got correct details? Because again, if you're getting them to sign a consent form and it's not all correct, is it a consent form that's legally binding? Do you want to open up to those questions? So there are things, absolutely, check the number. You want to be able to reach them if there are any issues. It's also if you need to change an appointment round and you can't get hold of them because there's a digit missing, that's a real pain in the backside, isn't it? Right, scenario 3. We've got Princess. Would anybody like to take on Princess?
So these.
So we picked up on the fact that we did give a cost kind of up front, and did say for stabilisation and x-ray,
Yeah.
which to us meant stabilisation and x-ray,
Yeah.
but the client might not have picked up on the fact that the extra. So even if you don't give a figure at that point, so it's £500 for this bit, there will be ongoing treatment costs once we know what's the wrong,
Yeah.
and then we can discuss those afterwards. But
Yeah.
he might not have been aware that the £500 wasn't, even though we said it, is in a stressful moment.
People get really confused, don't they? Especially when they're in an emotional state.
I
And
was going to
actually,
say, being shocked and emotional, you only hear what you want to hear.
absolutely. And he might be sat on that, would have just heard that, and he's like, no, I can deal with that, I can do that. And he paid it, so the cost wasn't necessarily a big impact for him. Well, it impacts us all, don't get me wrong. But he would be prepared to pay that. But you would, if you were in this situation, how would you feel? You'd be a bit frustrated, wouldn't you? Yeah. Yeah. And then when it comes to afterwards, to be honest, I don't think I'd go back for my repeat appointment either, because I'd be concerned about that. So we make a lot of assumptions, and there are a lot of assumptions in that. And I'm not saying you all do this directly, but it's just an extreme example of where that communication breaks down. So absolutely, the first bit was perfectly correct. An initial estimate to give you an idea of what's going on. Actually, after an hour, when everything was stable and we had better visibility of what was going on, we should have rung him and gone through it in more detail and given him options, control and choice. We made an assumption that she was staying in because he was so worried. Actually, he might have wanted her home. And then it was never updated. I mean, I assume that you update quite frequently with your hospitalised patients on cost.
We try to.
Yeah.
Yeah. We get quite a few of these actually, complaints wise from patients.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I'm trying to kind of do daily cost updates, bill updates, but it is difficult to discuss costs with everything else as well. But even for insured ones, we should be keeping them updated.
And it's how you put it in the conversation, isn't it? Because actually you want to let them know how their pet is and how their pet is doing and what treatment has been given. So if they've had an RVM with them all night, say that. Otherwise we're undervaluing the service that we're giving. They've not just been sat in a kennel on their own, and people don't necessarily know that. When you as a client coming into the practice, you generally just see the front bit, which is a couple of people and some doors. No idea of the chaos that goes on at the back with the number of people, the number of pets, and all of the different things going on. It'd be a surprise to them. So why aren't we telling them that? And then we say, just to update you, your bill is now sat at here. It says on your notes that you wanted us to let you know if it was going to go above a certain point. And with the treatment plan that we've got, we're probably going to hit here. Is that okay with you still? Let's go with that.
Just get in the habit of doing it.
It is, yeah. And make sure you note it.
Yeah.
So also note who you've spoken to, because then they'll go, well, you didn't tell me that. I told your wife. And well, she hasn't told me. And then you get stuck in the middle. Make sure you know who you've spoken to and when, so that you've got that to check back on as well. It's just helping you when you do that. So yeah, he was just really worried, wasn't he? And he was in a panic response, and an estimate was given, but a lot of assumptions were made after that. So they're all situations, they're all complaints that I dealt with, and they're things that I'm sure will be very similar to what you deal with as well, because they're not rare, they're quite common. And you can see where different aspects, with different responsibilities with different team members. We're all responsible for it. It doesn't just fall on one person. It's not just the vet's job, the nurse's job. It's all of us. And what could we do better to make sure that we're being transparent in our communication and giving people options? So this is looking at different responsibilities. And I'll start with the clinical team. And this is just to get you to think about your process and what you follow in that room. So you're using your skill and knowledge to your best ability. They come to you for your skill and your knowledge, of which you have vast amounts listening to them this morning. You want to talk through examination and checks, engage the client and ask questions and listen. You want to clearly communicate a treatment plan and also let them know if it's not going to be curative. Is this going to be, diabetic patients? This is a lifetime commitment. Are we making that clear? We might take that for granted. I'd certainly struggle to stick to that consistently for my pet, and I would probably make a different decision. So, are we giving them the options and the reality, or are we making assumptions that, well, actually, no, we can maintain this, all right? Is that really what they want to do? So ensure that they understand those recommendations, question them, get buy-in. If it's long-term treatment, recheck again. Follow charging protocol. It's so important to be consistent. I mentioned leakage this morning. Really, really good example of leakage is your Minims eye drops. Never get charged on a consult when they're used. They cost, well, they've actually gone up quite a lot, I think, but they used to cost maybe about £5 for that individual one on there. So you think, okay, I'm saving the client that because I'm not charging it. The client doesn't know that. There's no added value in doing that at all. But actually, it just means then that you're increasing your leakage, and that adds to your turnover, which then adds back into the investment into the practice and into you. So there's all these little things: hospital food, extra drip bags, the extra X-ray that wasn't what was on the estimate. Make sure that we're being clear and communicating this, because if we are, then people know how to move forward and what to expect. So give those clear cost expectations. Your reception team should not be the first person to communicate that final cost. That's not fair on them at all. Because then they have to go through the file and they have to identify what has happened, what that is, and then try and explain it while getting the full brunt of the force from the client. I've been there many times. I empathise with you guys. It should be a team effort. The reception team set expectations. Then you follow that through so it's well communicated. The client is then able to make an informed decision and informed consent. We do have to be mindful of vulnerable clients. It's okay to check, do you need to speak to somebody else about this? Would you like to call somebody else? Just try and be aware. We can't fix every situation and I can't give you every solution, but just be aware. Have they understood? Do they need it communicated in a different way so that they can understand the process, and do they need time to think about it as well? And take the client to reception if you can and hand over to the receptionist. It saves the rugby tackling as they walk out the door. show that referral. We're talking about internal referral. Internal referral works with your own team members. You're referring them to the nurse, and we're going to refer you to a receptionist to book the next appointment for you. At that point, tell them how much the second appointment will cost. Set those expectations. And our front of house team responsibilities. What can we do to make sure insurance is encouraged? Are we being fair and consistent with that? We were talking about it earlier, so I won't go into too much detail about it. But it should be something that we're doing. If we've got it there to offer, then we can ask. And we want to have those conversations before it comes down to discussing the final bill and then saying, well, are you insured? Because that feels a bit wrong sometimes. Actually, let's get it on the notes and on the file and keep it updated. Are they aware of the consult fee prior to their appointment? There is no reason you can't get that into a conversation when you're confirming an appointment. Are they offered an estimate prior to other procedures? So if you know that you're booking something in for a procedure, you can check that they've got an estimate. If not, how can we make sure that they get one? And how do you have that cost conversation? You might want to take a seat for this one. Heard that many times. You're going to have to send them out to get a job, aren't you? Heard that one as well. Don't devalue the service that you're offering. You are a huge, significantly experienced team. And you are offering a great service that people are coming in to see you for. So make sure, how would you like to pay today? Absolutely fine. And leave it at that, confidently. Because you believe in what you're offering, which I'm sure you do. So phrases you can use if you're trying to open up those conversations. We talked about open questions. We want to allow people to feel like they've got a bit of control and a bit of choice. So what are your initial thoughts? How does that feel to you? How does that sound? What would you like me to do? Which option would you like? And what cost expectations or limitations do you have? Some people might want to have that conversation. And what could you do? Don't put your own barriers onto our clients, because different perspectives. It's our responsibility to communicate. We need to manage those expectations. We need to be clear, transparent, fair and consistent. We need to allow feedback. Remember that communication process right at the beginning. We need to set expectations, allow options. Gold standard. I was so glad you didn't use any of that in your values this morning, because I was like, oh, what are we going to do? I really challenge that phrase, and I'm sure from what I've seen this morning, you don't utilise it. But you might hear people say it. And all I think that phrase does is set you up for failure. Because what does that mean? The best example of gold standard expectations for our clients, because this is all they've really got to relate to, is Yorkshire Vet versus Fitzpatrick. Okay? We're kind of not there, are we? We're nicely comfortable somewhere here. And what does it mean to them? And if you think gold standard means offering, proper your diagnostics into MRI, CT, that full level of workup, the majority of our clients aren't going to be able to do that. So actually what you're looking at doing is the best and most appropriate care for that patient at that time, tailored treatment. And if you're doing that, and for that patient, it means some pain relief so it's comfortable, you've done a really good job, and you should value that. Just because they can't go down a different route that maybe you would take with your own pet, or ideally you'd like to go down that route, doesn't mean that's the wrong decision if you're still maintaining that pet's welfare. So I would say give yourself a break with that and look at what you do, and actually you do really well, and different options are okay. And you can explain that to the client as well. Does that make sense? It gives me a twitch, that word, if I hear anybody say it. They used to teach it at uni, don't they? I think they've maybe stopped now, but I still hear it come out of some new grads in our new grads programme.
We had the discussion about it when Ben was doing the.
Did you?
We had that exact discussion.
Excellent.
Not wanting gold standard.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's an unfair concept. You come out from a uni and you've got your referral hospital that you work in. We work in real life and general practice, and actually you just want to give the best care for that pet at that time. Estimates are so important. Make sure that they know the difference between an estimate and a quote, and allow yourself some contingency around it as well, because they will stick to it. Add on, and if it's lower than the estimate, you've exceeded expectations. Make sure that they're updated, like with Princess, you would have given them an updated estimate once you realised where you were. so that they can have that choice. Record the conversation time and who you spoke to, and you can give written estimates, print it off for them, email it to them, however you can transfer them that information. And because remember that they might be upset or shocked and they might not take in information all the time, or they might need to go and speak to somebody else in their house to make that decision. And actually the veterinary surgeons out there says that, you know, we need to offer clients a realistic initial estimate, which may be for a defined period of time if appropriate, based on the best available information at the time of the anticipated cost of the veterinary treatment. We have to do it. Really, really important to value yourself. You've got the qualifications, the knowledge, and the skills. I'm going to ask you a question now. How do you feel when a client says, oh, I've been looking on Google or I've seen on Facebook?
Cringe.
Feel annoyed? How many of you have used Google to look up something for yourself or your child or your husband, partner?
Yeah.
I Googled thumb pain the other day. We do it because actually we're a bit unsure and we want to sort of, are we doing the right thing? Are we going down the right route? But what you want to do is then step in there and be like, no, you can trust us, we are the professionals. Not judge for them doing that, but make sure that then they come to you. And we do that by making sure that we're valuing the service we've got, advertising the service that we've got, advertising the skills that we've got, and introducing who we are. So you become that trusted resource. Because you wouldn't bother phoning your doctors, would you? Because it'd take you a week to get through if that at all, and then they wouldn't tell you anything on the phone. You can be that person to go to. So clients will pay to see you for that knowledge and skill to give them the best advice and information, but we need to be transparent. And undervaluing yourself will give the client less confidence in you. When they talk and they see inconsistencies, and they do talk, and they do share, then that can really start to break that relationship, that trust. So what I'm going to ask you to do with your barriers, we're going to pass them around clockwise, around the room, and you're going to solve the other person's barriers, the other table's barriers.
I've got one in my
If we share some of these barriers that we've overcome, just in the interest of time, I'm going to go around each table and I want you to just share pick one barrier off that list and share your thoughts, your discussions around how you could overcome that. And by doing this, I'm not saying that this is the fix for everything, this is the solution, but it's just trying to encourage you to listen to other people's ideas and think, oh, actually, could I do that slightly differently to make that a bit better? And to challenge your ways of working. Could I do something differently? Would that work better? Am I doing the best that I can do in that situation? And also accepting that some of these challenges are completely out of our control. So what can we focus on and what can we control in that situation? So I'm going to start in the corner here. So if you just like to pick one of your barriers and then just explore how you overcame it.
Well, time is not one thing I think I'll do. Time's massive to pressure for the room, and time with the client, and time for the next person waiting. I was talking a little bit with Alison. Mandy's like to listen to consultators that phone due to come in slightly later in that session, asking if they'd like to come to our had an emergency, the vet's going late, we'll have a long wait, would you like to do book? Which would just create the vets a little bit of time, and I used to really appreciate it when Mikey did that, so that was a solution that I've seen work in the past. I don't know if you can still do that.
It's not always possible though. By the time you realise that the vets are running really late, the clients are usually here in the consult room.
Yeah, but you can do it for like the client half an hour later, maybe that hasn't set off. If it's just a booster. Yeah, I think being realistic about how much we can achieve in this moment we've got, and not being bothered about.
I was like,
You have to prioritise sometimes, don't you? So yeah, absolutely doing that, prioritising what you're seeing, what you're doing. And if somebody comes to you with multiple problems, accepting that you're not going to be able to fix all of that in 15 minutes and actually saying, okay, so what can we look at today? What would you like me to look at today in the time that we've got? And then we can make a plan for dealing with the rest, which may be another appointment, which yes is charged for, but your time is charged for. Remember, don't devalue yourself. If your diary you feel really isn't working and this is a repeated issue for everything, then that's another conversation to have, isn't it? But, you know, what could we do differently? Don't just say this isn't working. What would work? What would you need? So yeah, the people that will impact people in different situations. You have people that have no issues with time at all and seem to just run through. We will hit things that take time. And then you have, other situations where actually you think, I've just had sick pet after sick pet after sick pet, and it builds up, doesn't it? And then you've got to think, right, what can we do about that? So it's just making sure that you discuss as a team and problem solve and give ideas and suggestions. I think you had quite a lot written down for time, didn't you? What did you put on there?
We put utilising other team members,
Yep.
and even things like with cost discussions, even just the fact that it's already been mentioned will save time at the front desk, because you're then not going to have a much bigger conversation
Yes.
about it, or things like nurses staying in samples for you, which will give you more time then to have the conversations with you afterwards.
And if you've got the team available, your nurses can take samples for you, can't they, in a lot of situations as well. So it depends on the skills of the team that you've got around you. And again, you said earlier this morning, utilising the team to its most efficient capacity. Is everybody doing what they can do, or a job's being done by people that doesn't necessarily need to be done by that person? Yeah, there's no great fix for time. It's there, it's fixed, we can't control it. It's just how we use that as well. Thank you. Do you want to go next?
Yeah.
Next table.
Pink. Yeah, so one of the barriers here was clients' unrealistic expectations, and our solution we came to fairly quickly is making sure that we've got good communication, so improving on that communication to prevent disappointment down the road.
Absolutely, you need to know what those expectations are, don't you, so you can discuss where you could meet them within those expectations. So yeah, thank you. And in the corner over there?
I was just going to read out the unrealistic expectations as well that Ben was just saying about, and it's very much keeping a very clear timeline, costs, all the way along from reception, vets, nurses. So yeah,
absolutely. Thank you. Nikki's table.
We put down understanding the legal requirements when needing appointments for medication.
Yeah.
Nikki was saying about the fact that they're getting an overall health check. It's not just literally an appointment, here's your medication, off you go. They're getting a full nose to tail health check, so explaining to them that the value of that appointment.
Absolutely, adding the value in. You're not doing it just because you need to give them tablets, are you? It's making sure that they're working.
You might need to change the dosages and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely, thank you. And here, finally, the last one.
We got inability to give advice that they're asking for.
Yeah.
So just referring to another team member and not being afraid to say, I don't know, but I will find out for you, and not just try and flag it. Because it just makes everyone look ridiculous. And, so, but not being afraid to say, I don't know, like it's okay to say, I'll find out for you.
100%. It's actually really beneficial to say, I don't know, but I can find out for you. I can go and find somebody who does. And also, not feeling like you have to answer it there and then. Because there is no harm in saying, I can give you a call back, set a time, a reasonable time, don't forget to put a note somewhere, or hand it over to somebody else. You don't have to answer things there and then if you don't know, and it's okay to say you don't know. You're one person, you can't possibly know everything. I say I don't know an awful lot, but usually you can find somebody who does, can't you?
I think that's the same in consults as well, going back to the poorly animals running over, like it's okay to not give them a cure there and then for every appointment if you're running behind. So I'd say rearranging other appointments as a last resort, and it's more what you can do to manage the time of each one. You don't have to fix the animal there and then, you can discuss options and get them back in for a proper scan, and it doesn't have to be an instant fix for everything.
It's that tailored treatment again, isn't it? And giving yourself the time to think about it, to process it, but also then the time to think about it, to process it as well. Because sometimes if you're feeling rushed as well, they may make a decision that actually they don't want to commit to, and then you struggle with compliance. So, it's just making all of it, every single bit really does go back to communication with your team and with the clients as well. So, like I said, you're not going to find every answer for everything. There are things that are out of our control, but actually, you've overcome quite a few of those big ones quite easily as a group, and you can do that. So actually, it's really nice just to check yourself sometimes and do that sense check. Could I do this differently that would work better? And it's okay to do that. We don't have to know everything. We're not perfect, but we should 100% value who we are, what we do, and what we offer. And share with each other. This is where giving feedback is really important. If somebody does something really well, tell them. Be specific about it. Don't just say, oh, well done. What did they do that they did well? And what impact did that have? Because actually that helps us learn and grow. Because then we're like, right, okay, somebody recognised that, noticed that, or I did handle that all right. They'll reflect on it. And it also makes giving feedback that isn't necessarily positive, but maybe developmental or corrective, easier as well. Because it's not feeling like an attack. It's like, well, actually, maybe we could have looked at it this way. Seeing another perspective. And we need to do that more. We're really bad at it. The whole society is bad at it, not just our profession. We don't give enough feedback. We don't welcome feedback either. But that is how we learn and grow. And that's what happens in here. There were differing opinions on tables about how we overcome a solution, or whether it is even a challenge or not. But it's somebody else's perspective. So we go right back to that first slide with the number in the middle. Does that make sense? Right, so just to summarise, be proud of the services your practice offers and be proud of your role. Your clients have chosen you to look after their pet. They've put trust in you. Charge consistently for each client and don't judge what a client might spend. Don't undercharge and lose value. Pet ownership does bring responsibility for the owner. It's two ways in that. Be clear about costs and give accurate estimates. Make sure that we're transparent so people can make informed decisions. Ask the client for their understanding and thoughts. Remember that feedback loop. And allow choice and support their decision-making process. So now I want you to do this. There is a start, stop, continue, I think, in the back of your booklet. And I want you to have a think now. Is there anything that's being done now, because it's always been done that way, that you do as a process or a protocol? Are there any better ways of working that will support you in providing that customer journey that we all want to our clients, and therefore working more efficiently as a team in providing that as well? And I want you to put that in the context of start, stop and continue. What do I want to start doing? What do I think I should stop doing? And what should I continue doing? And then I challenge you to look at it in a month's time. Hold yourselves accountable for your learning and your development. Did you start doing that? Did it work, or do you need to review it? Did you stop doing that, or have you slipped back into doing that again? And what is going well? You need to hold yourselves accountable for that. We can come and talk to you about different things. There might be one thing that you take away from it, but do you remember it in a month's time? So just take the last kind of 5 minutes now just to do that start, stop and continue.